Okay, so 8 new things you should know about Starfield before you buy. Number 1, the surprising performance of Starfield. This game has been taking reviewers by surprise. In particular, Digital Foundry have been raving about it. They recently said that it runs even better than the gameplay trailers. Quote, it basically doesn't look as jerky as it's looked in all of the footage so far. Now personally, I didn't even think the footage looked jerky, but seeing as the actual game runs even better, according to Digital Foundry, that is great news. And continuing the topic of performance, here's something I found really interesting. There's a strong chance it will use DLSS technology in the very near future. DLSS, if you didn't know, stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling, and it makes games run a whole lot better, giving you vastly higher frame rates while maintaining graphical quality. Now, the reason it's a surprise that Starfield could be implementing DLSS soon is because this is an NVIDIA technology. NVIDIA has patented this tech, and no one else can use it without partnering with them. The thing is, Starfield is partnering with NVIDIA's fiercest competitor, AMD. AMD is Starfield's exclusive partner, meaning Starfield can only use AMD technologies. Starfield is also being bundled with AMD's just announced 7800 XT and 7700 XT graphics cards. But this won't necessarily prevent the game using NVIDIA's DLSS technology. AMD gaming chief Frank Azor says, quote, if they want to do DLSS, they have AMD's full support. He says there's nothing blocking Bethesda from adding it to the game. According to this article from The Verge, it's a request rather than a demand. If they ask us for DLSS support, Azor says, we always tell them yes. And that is good news. But the question you might be asking is, well, why is Starfield built on AMD hardware if Nvidia has arguably the better tech? That's mainly due to Xbox. Xbox uses AMD chips in its Xbox Series X and S, and Starfield is, of course, this year's biggest Xbox game. So there's only going to be one winner when it comes to which graphics card manufacturer Bethesda is going to align with. That said, with the news they can add DLSS support to Starfield down the line to boost the game's performance even more, we're getting the best of both worlds. Something pretty major you can't do in Starfield, and something you were able to do in Skyrim and Fallout, is diving. You can't dive below the waves and reach the bottom of the water, which really limits undersea exploration. The reason I say this is because I know someone who's currently reviewing the game who I am very jealous of, and this is what they told me. Now, obviously I can't verify this because I haven't played the game myself, and also they might have just told me that as a complete lie, but if it's true, it's pretty disappointing. Not from a content standpoint, as there's more than enough space to explore, but I mean in terms of immersion. Like, you can swim in lakes and rivers, and there's water physics just like you would expect, but you can't actually dive beneath it. It would have been nice to have a swim down through an alien ocean and see what weirdness awaits below the waves. Although saying that, there are alien sea creatures. So as you're swimming, you can see marine life, and if you were so inclined, attack it. We haven't seen a single shot of Starfield's water in any of the gameplay footage released so far though, so I really wonder what Bethesda are hiding. It's just such an odd choice not to show any water, considering, you know, it's pretty central to life along with food and sunshine. So I think it's worth knowing these limitations to the water gameplay before you buy Starfield. Next up, how different copies of Starfield are entirely different. Your version of Starfield is unique to you. You won't be playing the same game as I am. I won't be playing the same game you are. So planets won't be in the same place, for example, and the things on those planets, like lakes and mountains, will also be in completely different positions. And the reason for that has to do with procedural generation. We all know Starfield uses procedural generation to generate its 1000 full-size planets, because otherwise it would literally be an impossible task for the devs to make everything by hand. But something a lot of people might not know is that this means the actual playing space of Starfield is random as well. It's different for every player. And it goes further than that as well. Bethesda head of publishing Pete Hines recently appeared on the official Bethesda Twitch channel, and he mentioned that even quests in Starfield are affected by procedural generation. He mentions how during Starfield's development, there was a game tester who was stuck on a quest. The quest tasked him with finding a specific planet, but he couldn't find it, so he was asking Hines for help. The thing is, Hines wasn't able to help him because Hines' version of the game is different to the tester's version. It means that if you're stuck in Starfield, you won't be able to consult a guide telling you where to go. While that will lead to each player having a unique path through the game, for me, that's kind of a negative. Personally, I would prefer a single unified universe and a unified experience. But I will say there are some consistencies in Starfield's universe. For example, the locations of major cities and major planets is consistent, so throughout the main quest, you will be going to the same locations as everyone else. The city of New Atlantis, for example, is in the same place for you as it is for me, so at least there is some consistency. Next up, the length. How long is Starfield? Now, this is something that's definitely worth knowing before you start because you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. And conservative estimates put this at 1,000 hours, which is huge. And that's just how long Hines says he put into one path in Starfield. And by that I mean 1,000 hours playing one particular way, like playing as a master crafter and leveling up your crafting skill. Or 1,000 hours playing as a spacer and spending all of your time in space hopping between space stations and hijacking ships without ever touching down on a planet. That's another 1,000 hours just doing that. And that is insane. Like, I knew Starfield was big in terms of size, but I didn't know it was big enough that you could play it in this really narrow way and just do one thing the entire time, if you so wanted. Honestly, what's been coming out of Bethesda devs like Todd Howard and Hines recently, we're literally not even close to visualizing how big this game is. Even the most ambitious thought you have is probably underselling it. And we get a lot of insight from Hines' appearance on that same Twitch channel. Hines says something pretty epic here. He says, "We don't measure this game in hours, we measure this in decades. There's still people playing Morrowind 20 years later. It's about how people play these games and how much it means to them," he says. People lose themselves in these games forever, which for me almost makes me a bit scared to start this game. But it's definitely something you need to know before you buy, purely because you might need to book some time off the work. I'm thinking about 1,000 hours at least. Next up, the Bethesda moment. What is this game's Bethesda moment? Now, if you didn't know what a Bethesda moment is, it's basically the moment in a Bethesda game where the tutorial ends and you're let loose in the world. In Oblivion, it's where you come out of the starting dungeon and see the open world of Cyrodiil for the first time. In Fallout 3, it's where you emerge from the vault into the capital wasteland. And in Starfield, the Bethesda moment is where you escape from the mine your character works in and see a huge mountain in the distance. But the thing here is that mountain isn't the extent of where you can go like it would be in most sandbox games. This is just the start. Starfield subverts this Bethesda moment by letting you fly off into the sky, go off the planet, leave the system, and fly 1,000 miles away. This is a Bethesda moment on a completely different scale. Hines says it actually feels daunting, but after a few hours, you start to get a sense of how it all fits together. Okay, time to clear up planetary exploration. According to this tweet by insider gaming owner Tom Henderson, you can't walk completely around a planet. Instead, planets are made up of a handful of massive tiles, and you'll actually load between them. To do that, you have to get in your ship, take off, and land in a new tile, each tile having its own landing zone. Now, there's been a lot of miscommunication about this from Bethesda. On one hand, we've got Pete Hines tweeting stuff like, "Yes, you can explore the whole planet if you want, walk on, brave explorer." On the other hand, Todd Howard has already said planets are made up of tiles wrapped around a giant sphere, essentially, and that you do explore differently given its scale.
You do explore differently in this game given its scale. That usually involves exploring an area you've landed in.
So you can absolutely forgive people for being confused. Kind of a mixed message there, but to clear it up, no, you cannot walk in a straight line from your location and end up at the start days later. You cannot cross an entire planet in one go without a loading screen. As for how long you can actually walk before a screen tells you to turn back, early reports say it's around 40 minutes. But 40 minutes is more than enough time, considering it takes around 35 minutes to cross the entirety of Fallout 76's map. So if you think about it, each tile in Starfield is as big as an entire Fallout 76 map, and that's massive. Also, to put it in context, think of how settlements in Bethesda games work. Like in particular, let's take Whiterun in Skyrim, for example. You have to interact with the front gate and load in to Whiterun. In Starfield, each of these tiles is like Whiterun, separated from the rest of the game by a loading screen. It's just that here, these areas are many times bigger than Whiterun. Next up, another thing you have to know before you buy Starfield is there is a loading screen every time you enter your ship. I don't think a lot of people know this, but there is no seamless transition between you walking onto your ship and you flying into space. This is based on, again, what my source has told me, and again, I'm not able to verify this at this point, but I do believe what he is saying here. Now I fully understand why Bethesda has done this, and I personally have no problem with it. If they put a loading screen here, I mean, they obviously have a reason for doing so, a technical reason. Like, I can imagine it being a huge strain on resources without this important loading screen. Planetary gameplay and space gameplay are kept separate, otherwise the entirety of space and the entirety of planets would exist at the same time, and that would just be a massive strain on resources. But here's why people might be being misled about this particular Starfield feature, and that's due to an anecdote I've heard being trot out a few times now, both by Todd Howard and by Pete Hines. And that's about how they're in a shootout with a group, and that group then retreats onto their ship. Howard/Hines say they give chase and follow them onto the ship. Suddenly, the ship takes off and they find themselves in space where the fight continues. So they've had an epic fight that's taken them from the planet's surface all the way to outer space. But when they tell this anecdote, they always seem to omit the crucial detail that there's a loading screen in there. It's not quite the like, whoa, what's happening? Oh, we're taking off and we're fighting in space kind of sequence they're painting it out as there's a short but nonetheless noticeable loading screen sandwiched in between. There is, however, the ability for you to freely walk around your ship while it is in space, so when you get that loading screen out of the way, you're free to be a starship captain again. And finally, something you need to know about Starfield is you can't do everything in one playthrough. If you want to see everything the game has to offer, multiple playthroughs is a necessity. For example, if you decide to put your skill points toward passing speech checks and increasing your levels of persuasion, you won't have enough skill points left over to, say, increase your lockpicking. Now, that might be pretty par for the course in some RPGs, like you can never max out everything, but I would have assumed Starfield, as a massive 1,000-hour-long RPG, would give you enough time and space to perfect every character stat you wanted to perfect. But no, instead, what you're gonna have to do is start again in New Game Plus. Todd Howard said in a recent interview with GQ magazine that Starfield has a New Game Plus mode that rewards repeat plays, which suggests you really do need to play this game over and over to experience different things. It's not so much building up one character into this jack of all trades, but role-playing as multiple different characters who all have different specializations, whether that's flying Class A ships, crafting top-spec weapons, mind-controlling alien wildlife, etc. Like, there's a skill called Special Projects you can unlock, and this lets you build powerful and unique weapons and equipment. Or you could pick the skill that lets you fly bigger and better craft. And from the sounds of it, you'll need different characters if you want to experience both of these things in the game. Saying that, I do expect there to be some kind of respec option in the game, so if you're like me and you often put your skill points in the wrong place, or you simply just moves change your mind a lot, hopefully you'll be able to visit a guy and pay a few credits to completely reset your life. So those were 8 new things you need to know before you buy Starfield. Just trying to keep it real, hopefully these didn't dampen your excitement, but I'll just give you a bit more information before you buy the game. But let's be honest, we're all going to buy this game. At least I definitely am, unless I get run over by a car or something. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, then please leave a literal like on the video. That would be very much appreciated. And for more Starfield guides, subscribe to the channel.